I thought she's barren.
3 years after divorce, X and his mistress comes to show off their pregnancy, but saw her with twins for the president. Esteemed viewers, welcome to Luxurious True Life Stories. Please like and subscribe for more captivating luxury true stories. Let's get into the story. Deborah co-volunteered at a small charity art exhibition after work, carefully arranging architectural models she had helped design. She preferred calm environments and simple living, raised by modest parents who valued stability over wealth. While adjusting a display, she noticed a well-dressed man studying her housing model longer than anyone else had. Richard Nathaniel, the event's sponsor, asked precise questions about materials and long-term durability instead of offering shallow praise. Deborah answered confidently, surprised he actually understood structure and planning. The conversation lasted far longer than expected, moving from buildings to dreams and the idea of leaving something permanent behind. As the hall emptied, Richard returned with 2 coffees and continued talking like the night wasn't ending. Deborah normally avoided strangers, yet she didn't feel uncomfortable. When they finally stepped outside, he asked to see her again, not formally, just another conversation. After a moment's hesitation, she agreed. Their meetings became regular. Sometimes breakfast before work, sometimes late evening walks after Deborah finished her projects. Richard listened carefully and remembered small details, how she disliked noisy restaurants, how she preferred window seats, how she sketched ideas while thinking. His attention felt comforting, almost protective. He introduced her to elegant places she had never visited, yet he always let her choose what to eat and where to sit. Deborah admired his ambition. He spoke often about building a legacy that would outlive him. She believed it meant success and stability, not realizing how deeply he needed control over everything connected to his future. Months passed and affection grew quickly. One night, standing beside a city skyline, Richard said he had never trusted anyone the way he trusted her. Deborah felt safe enough to believe him. When he asked her to build a life together, she accepted, certain she had found both love and security. Their wedding was elegant but quiet, exactly how Deborah wanted. For a short time, marriage felt peaceful. They shared morning coffee, planned home designs together, and hosted small dinners. Richard insisted she move into his large house, promising she would finally rest instead of working endlessly. Gradually he began suggesting she quit her job. He said she deserved comfort and he could provide everything she needed. Deborah resisted at first, proud of her independence, but he kept insisting it was temporary, just until they started a family. Trusting him, she resigned from her firm and stayed home. Days became slower. Richard handled all finances and schedules, and Deborah found herself asking permission for simple purchases. He called it care, yet her freedom quietly narrowed. She ignored the unease, believing adjustment was normal in marriage. Soon after she stopped working, Richard began talking about children constantly. At first it sounded hopeful, names, schools, and future plans, but the conversations quickly turned into schedules and expectations. He tracked dates on his phone and reminded Deborah every month when the timing was right. When pregnancy didn't happen immediately, his patience faded. He asked questions every morning and every night, as if answers could appear through repetition. Deborah tried to stay calm, believing nature needed time, yet she felt watched inside her own home. Even quiet dinners became discussions about results. By the 3rd month, Richard no longer hid his frustration. He started comparing timelines with friends who had children and implied something was wrong. Deborah reassured him gently, promising they would visit a doctor together. He agreed, but only for her. Richard scheduled appointments repeatedly, always during her busiest days, and insisted she attend every one. Deborah underwent examination after examination while he waited outside scrolling through his phone. Doctors spoke calmly, explaining nothing serious had been found and that both partners should be evaluated to understand better. Richard dismissed the suggestion immediately. He said he was healthy and there was no need for unnecessary testing. Instead, he booked another appointment for Deborah the following week. She felt embarrassed returning again and again, answering the same questions while nurses offered sympathetic smiles. Leaving the clinic that day, Deborah asked softly if he would at least do one check so they could move forward together. Richard's tone hardened. He said the problem was obvious and time shouldn't be wasted proving what they already knew. For the first time, the car ride home felt colder than silence. After the hospital visits, something shifted completely. Richard stopped touching her gently and began sleeping later than usual. He claimed work demanded his attention, yet he returned home smelling of unfamiliar perfume and impatience. Conversations became brief instructions instead of shared thoughts. He started eating separately, taking phone calls in private rooms, and locking his study door. Deborah tried initiating warmth, cooking his favorite meals, suggesting short trips, but he responded with distracted nods. When she mentioned the doctor's advice again, he accused her of trying to shift blame. The house that once felt spacious now felt suffocating. Deborah walked through quiet hallways wondering when partnership turned into isolation. She began to realize that love should not feel like constant defense, yet she still hoped patience would repair what distance had broken. One evening Richard arrived home unusually cheerful and introduced Susan Wright as his new business associate. She was confident, charming, and spoke as if she already understood the house better than Deborah did. She complimented everything politely but watched Deborah carefully between sentences. Susan began visiting often, sometimes meetings, sometimes dinner discussions that lasted late into the night. Richard laughed around her in a way Deborah had not seen for months. Whenever Deborah joined the conversation, they would suddenly change topics. He insisted it was only work and accused Deborah of overthinking. After several visits, Susan started bringing small gifts and acting familiar, leaving her handbag on chairs and walking freely into rooms. Deborah sensed something wrong but lacked proof. Richard's patience toward her disappeared completely whenever she questioned the situation, and silence became easier than arguing. The tension finally exploded during a small dinner Richard hosted for close associates. In the middle of casual conversation, someone asked about children. Before Deborah could respond, Richard laughed lightly and said they were still waiting on nature to cooperate. The room went awkwardly silent. Later that night, he accused her of embarrassing him by looking upset. He said his reputation mattered and people were beginning to talk. Deborah defended herself calmly, reminding him the doctors found no confirmed issue. His expression hardened. He said the problem was obvious and he refused to keep pretending. Within days, rumors quietly spread through their social circle that Deborah was infertile. She realized Susan was always present when those conversations began. Richard stopped hiding his irritation and began sleeping in another room permanently. The accusation had become his truth. One morning legal papers were placed on the dining table before Deborah woke up. Richard spoke calmly, as if discussing a business contract. He said the marriage could not continue without an heir and ending it early was better for both of them. His tone carried no anger, only finality. Deborah tried reasoning with him, reminding him marriage was more than children. He refused to argue and insisted everything had already been decided. He offered a small settlement, far less than what she had given up when she left her career. When she hesitated, he warned dragging the process would only damage her dignity further. By evening she packed quietly. No shouting, no tears in front of him. Susan stood by the doorway pretending sympathy while watching closely. Deborah left with a single suitcase and nowhere familiar to go. The house door closed behind her, ending a life she once believed permanent. Deborah rented a small apartment in a different city, far from people who knew her past. The first nights were quiet but heavy, yet the silence felt honest compared to the tension she left behind. She updated her portfolio and began applying for work again, determined not to depend on anyone. Weeks later she secured a position designing community spaces for a local development project. The pay was modest, but every decision she made belonged to her alone. She bought simple furniture, cooked her own meals, and slowly regained routines she once abandoned. Independence returned in small, steady steps. Instead of bitterness, she chose structure, morning walks, sketching after dinner, reading before sleep. The pain didn't disappear, but it stopped controlling her. For the first time since the divorce, Deborah realized her life could still move forward without asking permission. During a city renovation project, Deborah was assigned to present a small community park designed to a government committee. She expected routine officials, but security presence filled the building. Moments later, President Collins Reed entered quietly, observing rather than announcing himself. Unlike others, he asked practical questions: safety, accessibility, long-term maintenance, the same way she once discussed architecture at the exhibition years ago. Deborah answered naturally, forgetting his title and focusing on the work. Collins noticed her calm honesty and requested a second meeting to review the plan personally. Their next conversation lasted longer than scheduled. He spoke less about politics and more about responsibility and solitude in leadership. Deborah felt no pressure impressing him, only ease. When she left, she realized it was the first conversation in years where she wasn't being judged. Meetings continued under professional reasons, yet their conversations slowly moved beyond work. Collins learned about her divorce and the accusations she endured. He didn't offer pity, only respect for how she rebuilt her life quietly. Deborah noticed he never raised his voice and never forced decisions. Weeks later, he suggested keeping their connection private to protect her from public attention. They met in quiet places, bookstores, and empty early morning cafes before his schedule began. The relationship felt steady, free from pressure, and built on patience instead of expectation. Eventually, in a small private ceremony witnessed by only 2 trusted aides, Collins married Deborah. No announcements, no media, only calm promises. For the first time, she entered a marriage without fear of losing herself. Months into their quiet life, Deborah noticed changes she couldn't ignore. A medical visit confirmed she was pregnant. She sat speechless while the doctor smiled and added there were 2 heartbeats. Collins, usually composed, held her hands longer than usual, absorbing the news carefully. They decided to keep everything private. Public attention would only bring questions about her past, so only a small medical team and 2 trusted staff members knew. Collins rearranged his schedule to attend appointments discreetly, always entering through service corridors instead of official entrances. When the twins were born, the moment felt peaceful rather than grand. No announcements, no cameras, only relief and soft laughter. Deborah realized the accusation that once defined her life had been nothing but a shadow. She finally understood the problem had never been hers. 3 years passed quietly. The twins grew energetic and curious, filling the house with movement and laughter. Deborah lived peacefully, balancing motherhood and occasional design work while Collins managed his duties carefully around family time. Their home remained private, known only to a few trusted people. One afternoon, the gate attendant informed Deborah that visitors insisted they knew her. When she stepped outside, she froze. Richard stood there beside a visibly pregnant Susan, both dressed elegantly, both carrying confident smiles meant to wound. He spoke politely but with clear mockery, saying they wanted to share their good news with her. Before Deborah could respond, the front door opened behind her and 2 children ran out calling her Mom. Collins followed calmly, standing beside her. The smiles on Richard and Susan's faces collapsed instantly. The scene they came to create had reversed completely. Richard barely heard Susan speaking on the drive back. The image replayed endlessly, children, real children, running to Deborah. His mind rejected it at first, then questioned everything he once believed certain. He gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. That night he searched old medical reports and remembered the doctor suggesting both partners be examined. For the first time, the idea unsettled him. If Deborah could have children, then the explanation he built his pride on began to crack. Sleep never came. Susan tried calming him, insisting the children meant nothing, but his thoughts refused to settle. Doubt replaced confidence. What he once called proof now looked like assumption, and the certainty he carried for years began turning into fear. Richard's behavior changed overnight. He began asking Susan unexpected questions, dates, appointments, small details about the pregnancy. His tone was controlled but searching. Susan laughed it off at first, saying stress was affecting him. Days later he insisted on attending her next checkup. Susan hesitated before agreeing, her smile tighter than usual. During the visit he listened carefully, calculating timelines in silence. Every answer created more doubt instead of comfort. At home the tension thickened. Richard no longer spoke about the future nursery or names. Instead, he watched her reactions closely. Susan realized the certainty she relied on was fading, and calm conversations were becoming interrogations. Unable to quiet his thoughts, Richard scheduled a private medical examination without telling Susan. He chose a clinic in another district and requested full fertility evaluation. The waiting hours felt longer than years. When the results arrived, the doctor spoke carefully but directly. Natural conception was impossible for him. The words landed heavier than anger ever could. Every accusation he once made echoed back at him. He left the clinic numb, realizing the life he destroyed had been based on a false certainty. The memory of Deborah standing calmly with her children refused to leave his mind. For the first time, regret replaced pride. That evening, Richard's phone vibrated repeatedly. Large debit alerts appeared one after another, draining accounts he rarely checked personally. At first he assumed a banking error and called Susan immediately. Her phone was switched off. Unease turned urgent. He drove home quickly, noticing the gates already open and lights off inside. The house felt strangely empty. Drawers were open, shelves cleared, documents missing. Even framed photos were gone. His chest tightened as realization settled. The wardrobe stood half empty, safes unlocked, and storage rooms cleared. The silence answered what no call could. Susan had left, and she had not left lightly. On the dining table sat a single envelope addressed in Susan's handwriting. Richard opened it with shaking hands. The message was short and deliberate. The child was never his, and never meant to be. She thanked him for the lifestyle he provided and explained she had always been with someone else, John. She wrote that his certainty made everything easy. While he blamed Deborah, he never once questioned himself. The pregnancy only secured access to his wealth. By the time he read the letter, the assets had already been transferred and sold beyond recovery. Richard lowered the paper slowly. The silence around him felt heavier than the empty rooms. Everything he trusted had collapsed, and every decision he made now pointed back to the same moment, the one he chose, his pride over truth. Weeks later Richard lived in a small rented apartment, far from the house he once owned. Legal complaints led nowhere. The transfers had been carefully planned. Friends stopped calling, business partners withdrew, and his reputation faded quietly. The certainty that once defined him had disappeared, replaced by long hours of reflection. Across the city, Deborah walked with her twins through a quiet park while Collins watched nearby. Their life remained simple and protected from unnecessary attention. She no longer thought about proving anything to anyone. Peace itself had become enough. Richard eventually passed the park one afternoon and saw them from a distance. Laughter, calm conversation, ordinary happiness. He didn't approach. Some losses could not be repaired, only understood. He turned away slowly, carrying the weight of choices he could never change. As this story comes to an end, remember that behind every luxury lies a truth you ever see. If this story moved you, support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Until the next unforgettable true story, stay inspired.